guys, Josh from soccerreviewsforyou.com, bringing you a traction test comparison video today between the standard F50 adiZero, in this case the messy colorway, and the Adidas F50 adiZero Crazy Light. Now at first glance these shoes may appear to be very similar. Obviously the Crazy Light model is slightly more lightweight, but there's actually a shocking performance difference between these two shoes that I was not expecting that I want to share with you in today's video. For those that may not know, there is actually a difference between the stud pattern on the standard F50 and the stud pattern on the Crazy Light F50. And if you want a closer side-by-side view, I would recommend checking out my Crazy Light unboxing video. I'll leave an annotation on screen. But just to quickly glance over the differences, the first major difference is that the Crazy Light does not have that center support stud. And actually all the studs, at least in the forefoot area on the Crazy Light, are not only smaller in size, but also shorter in length, along with several other changes to the upper material and just general feel of the shoe. It actually makes for a pretty significant difference in performance between these two models that I wanted to point out in today's video. In order to demonstrate the differences in performance between the standard F50 and the Crazy Light model, I ran both shoes separately through a couple of sprinting exercises and filmed the whole thing in slow motion. Now in slow motion it will look very exaggerated, but it is actually what's happening. And in order for you guys to get a better idea as to how quickly everything is happening in these videos, here's a couple of clips of me running the drills at full speed. Now that you guys have a better idea as to how these shoes were tested, we're going to get into the slow motion clips, but before we do that, I want you guys to keep a couple of things in mind while watching the footage. The first thing is when my foot is planted, observe how much it's sliding around. Is it a firm plant? Is there slippage? Is there any kind of twisting and turning, any instability whatsoever? Definitely something to keep note of. Second thing to look out for is how much grass and dirt is being kicked and moved around. The more grass getting kicked up lets you know that the stud pattern is really digging in, whereas if no grass is getting kicked up, it's not really digging in much at all. The third and final thing to look out for is any kind of movement or rollover in the upper. This means that when I plant my foot and make a hard lateral cut, is the upper moving around? Is it shifting off the center of the sole plate, allowing my foot to slide around on the inside of the shoe, creating any kind of instability or taking away from the overall responsiveness, I should say. So again, look out for these three things. And with that being said, let's get right into the video. The first drill consists of a 10-yard sprint towards the camera with a 1-foot stop, and using that same foot pushing off in the opposite direction and accelerating away. This test is really meant to show how much stress I can possibly put on the shoe, and it really will definitely expose a shoe if it has issues with stability and especially rollover in the upper. As far as the standard F50 is concerned, it performed much better than I honestly was expecting in this particular test. It felt really solid. The hybrid touch synthetic, while it feels very soft and flexible on your foot, still has plenty of lateral stability. And as far as the traction pattern is concerned, you can see that there was very minimal slippage at planting. So for the most part, it felt very responsive, and I felt very quick when making this extreme lateral change of direction in the standard F50. So for the most part, I have to say I was really impressed. For as light as the shoe is, it's structurally very stable, and when it comes to making these hard lateral cuts, you're not going to have any issues with rollover or any issues with having a lack of responsiveness. Performing this exact same test in the F50 Crazy Light was actually pretty surprising to me. I noticed the first time that I wore them that they weren't as responsive as the standard F50, but while doing these tests, you guys can see that the standard F50 outperformed the Crazy Light in a major way. Just in that first plant, you can see that the studs dug into the ground really nicely. Lots of dirt and grass got kicked up, but my foot still slid quite a bit. I would say as much as 6 inches to a foot at time, and that was with every single plant. The reasoning for this is, one, the studs are smaller in size. You don't have that smaller stud in the middle. So while the studs are digging into the grass, you don't have that stopping power when you plant your foot. Another thing to take note of, and you guys can see it in every single clip here, is that the upper just is too soft for its own good. It feels great, nice and thin when making touches on the ball, but in terms of having sufficient lateral stability when making these hard cuts, it moves around and rolls over way too much. This last clip is actually pretty funny. I'm not going to talk over it, but it's essentially what happens after doing this test over and over again. You eventually slip. The next drill consists of a 10-yard sprint towards the camera into a one-footed 90-degree cut, a very common maneuver. Now with the standard F50, it performed extremely well. I'm still very surprised as to how much lateral stability this shoe provides, given how soft the Hybrid Touch synthetic actually is, and in and around the ankle area, the speed foil material, not necessarily on this pair. I did test out the speed foil one too, just to make sure they were similar. Keeps your foot nice and locked in, and as far as the stud pattern is concerned, there was some very minor slippage, but for the most part it maintained a nice responsive feel. As far as the Crazy Light edition is concerned, again, there was a difference in performance that was very noticeable while performing this particular drill. The first thing had to do with the traction. As you can see, there was a little bit more slippage in the Crazy Light, which did make for a slightly unstable feel, but to me the biggest problem with this particular maneuver was the lack of stability from the upper. It's just too thin, there's too much rollover, and you really don't have that responsive sensation that you get from the standard F50 in the Crazy Light. The final test starts off with me standing still and then pushing off on one foot into a sprint. The goal here is to put as much stress on that one foot as possible, trying to see some kind of rollover from the upper and trying to dig into the ground as much as possible. And as far as the standard F50 is concerned, it performed really well for this particular test. It's not the most aggressive stud pattern, so it's not going to kick up a lot of dirt and grass, but for the most part it provided plenty of grip. I had a nice firm push off, and the upper provides plenty of lateral stability, almost no rollover whatsoever, making for a nice responsive feel. With the Crazy Light F50, I wouldn't say that it performed badly in this test like it did in the other ones, but for the most part there still is a noticeable amount of rollover from the upper, and because it stretches and moves around so much when it's in these high stress types of situations, it does take away from the overall responsiveness, which is kind of the opposite of what this shoe is trying to achieve, which is with its ultra lightweight construction. As far as the stud pattern is concerned, I don't think that it struggled with this particular test, but again, I was overall disappointed with the performance of the Crazy Light. Alright guys, that's it for my traction test comparison between the standard F50 and the Crazy Light edition. Now while the Crazy Light F50 is more of a limited edition type of shoe, I have to say I expected more from it when it comes to overall performance. From a technical standpoint, I think that making a shoe this lightweight is a pretty impressive achievement by Adidas. And like I said, when I first put them on my feet, I was really impressed. But once I actually got to play in them, I have to say I was a lot less impressed with the overall performance. The upper is actually too thin and too soft for its own good, to the point where it lacks that responsive and stable feel when making those hard lateral cuts, which you guys saw in the video. And as far as the stud pattern is concerned, I wasn't too worried about the missing center stud, and I didn't think that the smaller shape of the studs was going to make too much of a difference. But again, as you guys saw in today's video, the difference is pretty significant coming from the standard F50 to the Crazy Light, to the point where if I had the opportunity to pick between the two when it comes to overall performance, I would pick the standard F50 every single time. It's just as lightweight in terms of what you can really feel on your feet, and in terms of traction and stability and just overall performance, it beats out the Crazy Light in every single aspect. So again, if you're wondering which is the best option for you, if you want the novelty that is the Crazy Light, I still think it's a very cool shoe and a very cool concept. It's definitely worth picking up, but if you're strictly about performance and having the best overall shoe, the standard F50 is definitely the way to go right now. So that's pretty much it, guys. If you have any questions or suggestions for other traction test comparison videos, be sure to leave those suggestions down below in the comments. Subscribe if you haven't already, of course, and if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to support it with a like. If you do want more information on the overall performance of either of these two shoes, you can find links to the review pages on my website down below. Also down below you will find all of my social media information. And other than that, guys, hope you enjoyed today's video, and as always, thanks for watching.